to our final presentation, our final public presentation of the academic year. My name is Cheryl Finley, and I'm the director of the Atlanta University Center Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective. This evening, we are really delighted and honored to be in conversation with Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, the 10th president of Spelman College, about the film Black Art in the Absence of Light, directed by Sam Pollard and available on HBO. We're really excited about this conversation because the film has come at a time, a pivotal time, not only for the AUC Art Collective, but I think a pivotal time for Black artists and the art industry writ large. And I'd like to just take some time now to thank our sponsors and to thank all the people who have made this evening possible, beginning with HBO. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to our AUC Art Collective team, Lauren Harris, Rachel Brown, Emily Hansen, and Jade Flint, to the Department of Art and Visual Culture and the faculty and chair, to the Division Chair of the Arts, Dr. Ayoka Chinzira, and to all of our students and our partners across the Atlanta University Center, including Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse College, and of course, Spelman College. The AUC Art Collective was established in 2019 with a generous grant from the Alice L. Walton Foundation. And it is our mission to prepare the next generation of African-American art industry leaders as art historians and curators and others who will fill many of the needed positions within the art industry, including registration, as well as conservation, and of course, roles in leadership as museum directors in the future. Now, I'd like to welcome President Campbell. And with this welcome, President Campbell, I just want to say how much your spirit and your leadership, as well as your experience for many years, is something that, of course, has inspired us as art historians and also inspired our students on campus, even students who are not in the AUC Art Collective as curatorial studies minors or art history majors. And about our program, I want to share that it's something that comes from the over 1 century or more, actually, since the establishment of Atlanta University in 1865. We want to say that the arts have been really important at the Atlanta University Center. With over a century of innovation and scholarship in the visual arts, the legacy of art history at the AUC continues with our students, with you, President Campbell, with our faculty, and with the Department of Art and Visual Culture. If we think about our collections numbering over 40,000 objects across 5 museums, collections, and archives, our vast holdings begin in the 17th century and connect you as students and community members, as faculty, to legendary artists, to historians, to educators, scholars, and innovators. And if you just look at this timeline, which is available on our website, www.aucartcollective.org, you'll see some of the innovation over the years. We like to think about the work of someone like W.E.B. Du Bois, who was at Atlanta University and who's responsible for the very famous, at least in art history and in curatorial studies, 1900 Paris Exposition, which we see as the first point on our timeline. By the mid-1930s, the Atlanta University Center had become the premier site in the Southeast for art instruction for African Americans. And this is a quote from Dr. Floyd A. Coleman from the book Hale Woodruff, Nancy Elizabeth Prophet, and the Academy. And Dr. Coleman was in residence as an instructor in the 1960s and 1970s at the Atlanta University Center. Of course, artists and educators, Hale Woodruff and Nancy Elizabeth Prophet, pioneered a new era of art education at the AUC, starting at Atlanta University in 1931 and at Spelman in 1934, establishing the first art departments at HBCUs. The AUC became a national model for African-American art education and practice. Subsequent initiatives such as the Atlanta Annuals and the Coordinated Art Program established a legacy of artistic innovation and excellence. Lauren, could I please have the next slide? And just to share, these are some images that are more contemporary of our students, of of the Hale Woodruff murals. Thank you, Lauren, of the Hale Woodruff murals at Clark Atlanta University Art Museum, and of our students on tour in Washington, D.C. On an Art Insider trip recently. And just to share just a little bit about our program, we enroll students at Clark Atlanta University, at Morehouse College and Spelman College, in degree granting programs in art history and curatorial studies. We also have an early college program for high school students, rising juniors and seniors in high school, to come for 1 month in the summer to study at the Atlanta University Center in partnership with our colleagues at the Hyde Museum, the history of art and curatorial practice. And it's a really exciting program, and I'm sharing this information knowing that many of you here are part of our community at the AUC Art Collective, but some of you also might be interested in enrolling your students in our early college program or in some of our undergraduate degree granting programs. So without further ado, I would like to welcome President Mary Schmidt Campbell, and I'd like to share a bit of an introduction about her biography with you. In March of 2015, Mary Schmidt Campbell, PhD, was named Spelman's 10th president. She began her career as the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem at a time when the city of New York was on the verge of bankruptcy. Under Dr. Campbell's leadership, the museum became the country's first accredited Black fine arts museum and a linchpin in the redevelopment of Harlem. She then served as Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the City of New York under 2 mayors, and from there entered the world of academia as Dean of New York University's renowned Tisch School of the Arts, where she served for over 2 decades. In 2009, President Barack Obama appointed Dr. Campbell Vice Chair of the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. Currently a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, she serves as a trustee of the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, the J. Paul Getty Trust, and the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and as director of Unity Technologies. Viewing Spelman as a necessity to, quote, reach an ideal of equality, end quote, Dr. Campbell launched Imagine, Invest, Ascend, a bold new strategic vision for the college that builds on the college's legendary legacy to educate Black women for the 21st century. Her focus has been on ensuring that every Spelman student graduates with a competitive edge, expanding Spelman's strategic partnerships, deepening its excellence in STEM, wedding that strength to art, innovation, and technology, and expanding signature academic programs that leverage Spelman's scholarly, creative excellence. To support this vision, under Dr. Campbell's leadership, the college has raised more than $240 million, the largest comprehensive campaign in the history of Spelman College. Dr. Campbell holds a BA in English Literature from Swarthmore College, a master's in art history, and a PhD in humanities from Syracuse University. She is the author of the award-winning book, An American Odyssey, The Life and Work of Romare Bearden, published in 2018 by Oxford University Press. And frequently, Dr. Campbell speaks on issues of higher education and African-American art and culture. She is the mother of 3 sons, 7 grandchildren, and lives in Atlanta with her husband of 52 years, Dr. George Campbell, Jr., President Emeritus of the Cooper Union for Advancement of Art and Science. Welcome, Dr. Campbell. We're so happy to have you here with us this evening.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Finley. And I want to say very quickly, thank you for your inspired leadership of our Atlanta University Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective. I was looking at the photographs from some of the programs that you have directed, and I have to say this is such a rich and richly complex set of experiences that you introduced to our students. And congratulations to all the graduating seniors who are out there from the program. You are all going on to these spectacular post-baccalaureate opportunities. And I just think we're so fortunate to have this program and to have you as the leader. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. It's what I'm doing today, and I think I shared with you in the green room that it was our last class. Today is the last day of classes at Spelman, and yeah, we all shared our experiences. I was teaching the capstone for curatorial studies, the curatorial practicum, where students create from start to finish their own exhibition. And just sharing that the work that I'm doing now at Spelman with students across the Atlanta University Center, training, preparing, inspiring our students to go on to become leaders in this field is something that I set out to do when I went back to school in my early 30s to earn a PhD, when I left a very well-paying commercial job in the commercial art world. This is really what my calling was. It took about 20 years to get here, but I just want to say I'm here doing what I want to do. Hey, Lauren, I'm sorry. Could you please go back to the slides just for a second, because I'd love it if we could just quickly go through those two slides. The one before, yes, here. So this is not part of our scripted questions that we have, but we wanted President Campbell to maybe share about these images here, because they are a walk down memory lane.
I'm happy to. So the image on the right shows me with my little tie on. That was the fashion back in those days, with Ed Koch. He's on my right. And I, unbeknownst to me, of course, I would go in a few years and work for him. But the significance of this photo is that we're walking along a vacant lot in New York City. And that lot had been the scene of the most awful debris and dereliction you could possibly imagine. I mean, it was just filthy and disgusting. And Studio Museum conducted a campaign where we would call the mayor's office almost every single day to tell him how awful this was and what a terrible experience it was for visitors who were coming to Harlem to have a museum experience, have to go right by this lot. We finally got the mayor to come up and take a look at it. And the reason we called him is it was owned by the city. He came up, he looked at it, he said, "Oh, this is disgusting." We said, "Well, yes." And so he arranged to have the city landfill it. And we were bringing him back to see the difference that it would make. What is now absolutely phenomenal is that that lot became the museum's sculpture garden. And now the whole building has been demolished, and it will now be part of their new David Adjaye building. And so it took 40, 50 years, but it was so wonderful to see how what started out as a grassroots community-based arts organization could be a force for transformation in its neighborhood. So I love that photo. It tells so many stories, and really, as you said, it gets to the heart of the purpose of the Studio Museum and its ability to advocate for itself and for the neighborhood that surrounds it. And if we want to have a conversation about community engagement, especially today, I think this is a photograph that stimulates that. And of course, we also love this image on the left-hand side by none other than Dawood Bey of you. And I'm going to assume perhaps this is at your desk at Studio? This was at my desk at the Studio Museum. And I'm very fond of this because Dawood was a very young photographer. Well, we were all, obviously I was very young. I was 15 years old. And we were very young, and all of us with such hope and optimism. And Dawood, of course, would go on to become a MacArthur Genius Award winner, a renowned photographer. But one of the things he used to always say is that you could always come to the Studio Museum and it was a crossroads where all the artists could gather. Mm-hmm. And there was something, I don't even think we realized back then how powerful that was, to have this place, this home for the artists that would nurture them, exhibit their works, let them be in residence, let them meet up with each other. in a world where that was not at that point very welcoming to Black artists.
Right, and here we're talking about the early 1980s, correct, President Campbell? And so, right, I mean, just to think about, sometimes we think about the world not being open and welcoming and we'll talk about New York City right now, because that's where we are. In New York City, let's say maybe in the 1950s, maybe in the 1960s, we all know the story of Harlem on my mind, right? But here we're talking about the early 1980s, and it's still a place that is very unwelcoming to Black artists. So when you talk about this, this idea of having a place to call home, a place where you can, go in and talk to people who are like-minded. This was a really, really important and foundational place for Black artists. And to think about, when I think about what we're doing now, led by you and your inspiration, I like to think of the work that we're doing at the AUC now as a place that our students can call home, that our faculty can call home, that artists can call home as well, that has the same type of, synergy and welcoming presence, wherein intergenerationally, we can learn from one another and help one another.
By all means.
Great. Okay. So I think we're good with the slides. Yeah. All right. So we're going to ask some questions and we're going to talk about the film. I think the first question that I'd like to ask President Campbell is, as a scholar of art and culture, what is your perspective on the importance of the film during a time when Black people are not only the focus socially and politically, but within the art world itself?
So I had two thoughts in response to that question, Dr. Finley. The first thought is your question made me remember that in 1966, Romney Bearden was asked to do a lecture on Black artists. And the Museum of Modern Art asked him to do this lecture. And he was eager to do it because he had grown up in Harlem. He was a child during the Harlem Renaissance. He was a young adult during the WPA years, and artists were being supported by the WPA. So he had been surrounded by artists his entire life. And he, of course, himself was a renowned artist. When he went to do his research, he found two books, James Porter's book and Cedric Dover's, which is pretty dreadful. And that was it. And he was shocked. I mean, he couldn't believe that there was no evidence, or at the time, he couldn't find any evidence of this just enormous outpouring of creativity. And what it speaks to is the invisibility, right, at that point of African-American artists. And so David Driscoll, 10 years later in 1976, mounts this show. And it's a revelation to Black people, but it's regarded almost with suspicion by the art world, right? So even with the evidence around them, they can't quite place it inside of the canon. They can't fit it. It doesn't fit in the canon as the canon has been defined.
Right, the canon of American art.
Yes.
The canon of Western art.
Yes. Yes. And then of course, you get to Soul of a Nation, right? And all of a sudden it's the hottest thing for anybody to see, which is, mounted a few years ago. And I give that narrative because that sense of invisibility and then sort of mild awakening to a kind of an explosive awakening is what we have experienced with all of the recent witnessing of all of these horrific events. Recently, from George Floyd's death, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. I mean, you just go on and on and on. And just the litany just is heartbreaking. But it has this feel of something cascading. So that's one way that I think about the sort of the sort of rising visibility of Black art now. But then there's another way that I look at it, and I think I look at it and I saw the work in that film, and emotionally, when I watched the film, what I felt was this just undeniable affirmation, this refusal to go away, this ability to keep inventing and creating with whatever has been laid on us.
Right.
And that kind of durability of vision and creativity is what I think this film really stands for, even more than this whole notion of invisibility. I think it's really the durability.
Right. I mean, it's a celebration of ideas, of innovation, and you know, like you said, this persistence, not stopping. So you've mentioned Romeo Bearden, and we're all, you know, so enamored by your wonderful biography of Bearden, and also, of course, we know that in the film there's a large focus on the work of Dr. David C. Driscoll. And I thought I would ask you maybe if you could perhaps connect the two and share with the young scholars that we hope are tuning in with us this evening, share with them what they should learn, what they should know about Dr. Driscoll, Romeo Bearden, and sort of the way in which they you know, work together at a certain period, but also how through Driscoll's work, we see this exhibition come to being, which opens, as we know, in Los Angeles at the LA County Museum, and then travels to the High Museum of Art. And we've seen this recently with the Julie Meritou exhibition that opened in LA at LACMA and came to the High. So if you could say something about that, please, for our students.
Sure. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that it was not easy for Dr. Driscoll to get someone to say, yes, let's do this exhibition. And it's easy for us now to think that everybody is saying yes to us. And I guess the advice that I give to any scholar who's going to do work on any aspect of African-American history, heritage, or contemporary art is that you have to be prepared for the no. And you have to want to do the research, do the work, go into the archives, interview the artists, find the artifacts, despite somebody encouraging you to do so. And if you look at what Driscoll did in terms of compiling that exhibit, and you consider the fact that everywhere he turned, people were saying, no, it's not really important. There really isn't, nobody's going to come, nobody's going to be in, if you do it, nobody's going to be interested in it. This kind of developing an inner compass that tells you what is necessary is an absolute requirement if you're going into this line of work. And the same was true for Bearden. After he was asked to do that lecture for the Museum of Modern Art, he said, he's an artist. He said, I have to start writing some books. And he wrote a children's book called 6 Black Masters of African American Art. And it's a lovely book. It's not a scholarly book, but he did co-author what I would consider a very serious history of African American art that wasn't published, that was published posthumously. But again, he felt that if nobody else is doing this work, I have to take the responsibility to do it, whether or not somebody thinks it's a good idea or not. Right. And both David and Romy had that notion. And I have to say, I came to the Studio Museum just as this show was coming to the Brooklyn Museum.
Wow.
And so that was the sort of tone and tenor of the people who were around the Studio Museum for the young artists and the young art historians and curators.
So that was a really pivotal time. I mean, to have that exhibition, you know, just what, 45-minute train ride away from the Studio Museum in Harlem. At that time when you first came on as director, it really probably developed like this, really great synergy of conversation around not just the history of African American art, right? These 200 years, but also, what do we do now? And of course, we know that year, 1976, is the bicentennial of the United States of America. So, that's another impetus for the exhibition on the part of Dr. Driscoll. I wanted to also ask, you speak so fondly, of course, of Romare Bearden, and I know that you developed a long friendship with him, and of course you are his biographer. Could you say something about the importance of artists, art historians, or curators in having relationships with one another? Is it important for an aspiring artist to get to know the people who might be writing about her work? Or, on the flip side, is it important for our students who are, art historians in training, curators in training, to do studio visits and to get to know contemporary artists who are working?
I would say getting to know contemporary artists who are working is probably one of the single most important things that you can do. And even if your specialty is from another era, even if you're doing, I don't know, late 19th century African American art or early 20th century, getting to understand how artists think, how they regard their materials, what inspires them, how they look at other art, how they draw from one another, what interests them in the environment, all of these, what are the conditions under which they work, what do they write about, what do they think about? I mean, what kind of music do they relate to? What other artists do they work with? I mean, all of these things, I think, give you a deeper understanding into the arts in general. And so I would make it a part of your mindset, your habit, and your practice.
Great. Thank you, President Campbell. I just want to remind everyone who's here with us this evening that we have enabled the Q&A, the question and answer function on Zoom. So if you have questions for President Campbell, please feel free to put them there and we'll be able to get to them in about 10 to 15 minutes. So another question that I have for you is about the film and the filmmaking process. I know that you are a longtime friend of the director, Sam Pollard, and I just wanted to maybe hear some insights from you about your experience in the making of the film, and then any reactions that you might wish to share from those around you to the film, since it has premiered on HBO.
I'm an unabashed fan of Sam Pollard's. I've known him back when he was an editor and writer, and watched him develop from editor, writer to director, producer, so, and he does it all. So he has a complete command of cinematic language. Mm-hmm. And that's very much evident in this film. It is such a beautifully visually crafted film. He understands film tells its story with visual images. That's what film is about. And so understanding how to go from one image to the next image to the next, how to create the pacing and the cadence and the rhythm is something Sam has completely mastered. And it's also was very interesting to me how candid the artists were with him. The artists were completely comfortable and at ease with him. They opened up completely to him. They trusted him, right? And so he gets, and it was true with David, and I'm, Moni, sorry that David passed away, as you know, last year, about this time, that he didn't get to see it on HBO. But Sam was able to get every single person who was in that film opened up. So I look at the film as a work of art itself. It is about works of art.
Absolutely.
But the film itself is a work of art.
Right. And I can't agree with you more, President Campbell. As you're aware, I'm sure, in our Department of Art and Visual Culture, earlier in the academic year, earlier this spring, Sam Pollard came to campus virtually to meet with our students who are documentary filmmakers. And it was a really, really wonderful experience for so many. And one of the things that I like about that statement that you made, that the film itself is a work of art, it makes me think about some of his other work, including, and I also think about how prolific he is and generous he is. That is Pollard, like JFK, I mean, not JFK, MLK, FBI, right? Yeah. That's the title. Yeah, you know, just how prolific he is, because these are two films that came out, you know, within, I think, about a year of one another. Yeah. So I know that our students in ABC are really learning from his practice and his process and his generosity. One of the other things that really struck me about the film, and you kind of touched on it just now when you spoke about how willing the artists were to open up to Mr. Pollard, and it's the intergenerational aspect of the film, of the artists who are featured in the documentary. Sarah Lewis, Jordan Castile, Radcliffe Bailey, Betty Saar. And I just wanted to know if you could say something about, you know, how intergenerational connections are important in terms of the way that we sort of forge relationships, perhaps sponsorships, mentorships between and amongst ourselves in order to help one another within this very competitive field.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you called it a very competitive field, and it is a competitive field. But one of the hallmarks of being at a place, for example, like the Studio Museum, is that you didn't feel that competition. Mm-hmm. You did, and you did feel that the older artists did not begrudge the younger artists. In fact, they very often felt as though they could be, and I wouldn't use the word mentor because that feels a little corporate, right? I wouldn't say in a formal way they were mentors, but they were available. They were available for the artist to come and hang out with them and just talk to them or come visit their studios. And the fact that the Studio Museum in Harlem had artist studios there, so that Kerry James Marshall was in his studio and you could visit. Terry Atkins, Allison Saar was just hanging around in her studio. And you could go up and just drop in and sit there and watch her work. The fact that there was this availability, I think, has been a wonderful advantage for our community of artists. And some, like the Astor Gates or Mark Bradford or Rick Lowe, have actually created communities from that, right? They've taken that idea of availability and people gathering and being in a community and the intergenerational, and they've actually made sites, you know, in Chicago and in LA, and I guess it's Houston that Rick Lowe is right. In. Vanessa German, I think, is in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. But you know, all this is so much a part of who we are. And if you look at our history, if you look at Harlem of the 1920s and 30s and 40s, that's how Harlem, you could literally walk down the street and walk into Augusta Savage's studio. Right? Her art, or
James Van Der Zee's studio.
Or James Van Der Zee's
yes.
studio. Or Charles Alston had a workshop, you know, and with Lessing Wells. And so there are these aspects of nurturing that actually are part of our tradition, and they have a long history. Mm-hmm. The very fact that Hale Woodruff could build this extraordinary art department here at the Atlanta University Center derives from that. And he could get great artists to come and teach.
Absolutely.
The same thing, Aaron Douglas does that at Fisk. You know, Howard University has the same. So there's so much in our history and culture that required us to bring some form of agency into taking care of each other,
Right.
that survives.
Right. And I think that you point really eloquently to it through this idea of the institutions that we ourselves have built. Whether they are brick and mortar or whether they are not brick and mortar. When I think about, the way that even institutions that have to do with, say, the conferences that we go to, and how, we feel comfortable because we know that if we go to the Studio Museum in Harlem, we can visit artists in their studios, or how we feel comfortable when we go to, say, a conference like Black Portraitures, just as an example, to be able to have intergenerational conversations amongst scholars who might be undergraduate students or scholars who are incredibly accomplished in their fields. That there is this way of connecting where there isn't really pretension in the room, and everyone, I think, it's been my experience, at least, that people are really genuinely interested in helping one another and listening and providing feedback and so on.
Right.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask another question, and this is, if you were given the opportunity to produce and curate an exhibition today, what would be the premise and which artists would you feature?
So that was a tough question, because I kept jumping around from one topic to the next. There are just so many things that I would like to do, and the reason for that is that I think that, and I'm borrowing Thelma Golden now. I'm going to borrow from a concept that she has. I love it that Thelma says, and Thelma Golden, by the way, is the current director and has been for 2 decades of Studio Museum in Harlem. But she has this concept of an exhibition as a white paper. And that is, it has a thesis, it develops its thesis, and it takes you through and brings to bear all the evidence that you need to realize and understand what that thesis is. And there's so many ways of presenting images or aspects of painting or sculpture or an artifact in general, and so many conversations that I would want to have along the way, that it's really hard for me to kind of narrow it down. So I'm actually going to take a pass on that one.
No worries, President Campbell. No worries at all. I mean, one of the things in teaching the curatorial practicum this semester, you'll see next week, we have brilliant students with amazing ideas. And I think when I imagine this white paper concept that you've just shared of Thelma Golden, I think about almost an exhibition that might be more of a series of public programs, as opposed to something that is actually, premised on a specific work of art or ideas around aesthetics, that there might be almost something around the programming itself that could be a form of an exhibition, if you will, or occurrence. So I'm going to ask another question, and this is a question for our students, but also for our lifelong learners. And the question is about resources. Are there resources that you would recommend for our students to have in their backpacks, things that they should be reading? Obviously, Black Art in the Absence of Light is the film that we should all be watching. But are there resources that you would share that we should all be aware of?
Yeah, I think that anyone going into any discipline should, I mean, there are obviously sort of key works that you read inside of your discipline, but it's really important for you to read the works outside of your discipline as well. Because an artist does not confine himself or herself to only looking at other works of art. An artist really, all the great artists that I know have voraciously curious intellects. They want to know something about everything. And if you're going to go into the world of the arts, you have to know something of the world, because what you come to art, you come to a work of art with the idea that you're going to enter into the artist world, and the artist is pulling so much from the world outside of his work. You impoverish yourself if you have just limited yourself only to readings of about the arts or about artists. So that really is my advice, which is why having a program like this at a liberal arts organization is so vital,
Right.
right? And the fact that our students can have a sweep of disciplines that circle around this, that will inform how they understand the arts, and as the arts are helping them understand the world.
Absolutely. And you point to our program, and the program that we have at the AUC Art Collective is one that offers a major in art history, a minor in art history, and a minor in curatorial studies. And the largest minor is curatorial studies. And I think the reason explicitly that it is a minor is to really encourage this interdisciplinarity, right? To be able to enable students of the arts, but also students of science, of business, of engineering,
Right.
to come to the arts and kind of have this overlap to really think about, what might be new and innovative in either of the disciplines that they ultimately specialize in.
Right.
So I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience now, President Campbell.
Okay.
All right. So this is a question from Jessica Berry, who asks, what advice would you give to young art administrators who would like to one day serve on a board of an arts organization?
So that's a great question, because board service is extremely important. Boards are the fiduciaries; they're the governing bodies, and they set the overall tone of an institution. And so understanding how you get to a board and how you can contribute to it once you've gotten on a board is a really important question. I wish more people asked that question. I think one of the first things that you can do is actually, if you're very young and you haven't started your career yet, is volunteer at a cultural institution. Get to understand sort of what is it about? How does it work? How does it interface with the public? What are the different positions that are there at that institution? So that's one way. Another way is that if you are further along in your career and you are developing as a young professional, you can actually let people know that you're interested in serving as a director of a museum. Many museums have young director groups, or groups for younger people to begin their affiliation with a museum. So if you check in your local institution, there's very often a sort of junior board or advisory board that can help you begin to get acclimated to board service. And as your career matures, you'll find that as your career matures and as museums start looking for people who might be donors, you can start, I'm being very serious, you can start donating to the institutions that might be institutions in which you have an interest in serving on a board.
Thank you, President Campbell. I think that's a great way to get us all started in serving on boards as we should. And I think that was a really wonderfully astute question to be posed. So I just want to thank Jessica Berry for asking that question. And I think that it was pretty apparent by reading your biography that board service is something that has been, very much a part of your career and very important to your ability to be such a strong and visionary leader and to be so successful in your field throughout the year. So thank you for answering that so honestly and with such great tips, President Campbell. So We have another question from, and I believe this is Spelman alumna Helen Fields. And the question is, Dr. Campbell, can you share any thoughts about the monetary value of Romare Bearden's work and the fact, she says, that his works may not or are not selling at a higher price point and keeping pace with some of his contemporaries?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot, Helen. And I'm not sure that there's a single answer to that question. There might be several answers. One answer is that most of Bearden's work are works on paper. And just traditionally, works on paper have not had as high a value as works that aren't on paper, because they're more fragile. And to give you a sense of how fragile Bearden's works are, he did a magnificent piece for his retrospective called The Block. It's 22 feet long, it's over 6 feet high, it's a monumental piece. That piece is owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Metropolitan Museum of Art can only show that work every 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when they show it, they can only show it for 3 to 4 months at a time.
Because it's a work on paper.
Because it's a work on paper, and because the sunlight, the air, everything will over time erode that work. And most of his greatest works were collage works, are works on paper. And so I think that's part of it. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book about Bearden is because I thought that up until that point, I felt that there was not enough said about Bearden and race and being an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a topic, for whatever reason, people feel that they don't want to talk about him and being Black, and for whatever reason, that was always taboo. And I actually think that's one of the most important aspects
Absolutely.
of who he is and what his artwork means. So I think there's still room for us to develop the public discourse around his work.
Thank you, President Campbell. So the next question is from H. Richmond, and the question is, what are your thoughts on how we preserve Black art and fairness to the Black creators, given this recent surge of desire to, quote, purchase and flip Black art?
Yeah, that's a long-standing question. So let me make sure I understand the question. What I think you're asking is that an artist sells his work for something, right? And then all of a sudden there becomes a huge burst of interest in the works of Black artists. And now that work is worth 10 times what the artist may have sold it. And there's a sense on the part of many, many artists, actually, frankly, Black and white very often, that they miss out on the escalation in value of their work. And the people who benefit from it are people, as you say, who hold on to it, sell it, and then maybe somebody else sells it again. And pretty soon a whole bunch of people are making money, but it's not the artist, right? So that's a question that I think has, if I'm understanding your question correctly, that's a topic that has been circulating for a very long time. How do we make sure that the artist can take advantage of the increase in value of his or her work as the work becomes more and more valuable? And I don't think we have an answer to that question.
I have a little bit of an answer, President.
Oh, great.
So, as you know, in January, we held a salon on blockchain and cultural heritage.
That's right.
Along with Art and Antiquities Blockchain Consortium.
Right.
And in that salon, where we were all learning about blockchain technology, those of us who were attendees for the first time, there was a discussion about something called a smart contract. And I think one of the ways to answer the question, maybe to begin to answer the question, is to think about how especially contemporary artists could engage in issuing smart contracts when they sell their works, or when they begin to work with a gallery or a dealer, when they work directly with collectors. And a contract like that would ensure that the artist would retain a certain percentage of the resale royalties of their work, should the work be, so-called flipped in the future. And so that's one way that I would propose, at least for contemporary artists that are out there. I think that it doesn't do a lot for the artists whose works may have already been purchased and are being held by others waiting to flip them. But that's one answer, using technology and sort of cutting edge technology that might be able to help some of our contemporary artists.
Or in the case, I was thinking of the case of Roy de Carava, right? Although you may own a Roy de Carava print, you don't own the right to reproduce it, right?
Absolutely.
He retained that. And now his widow, Sherry, has retained that right. And so, I can enjoy my Roy de Carava photograph, but I certainly have no right to reprint it in any form. And if I do, I have to get permission from her, and the fees go back to the estate.
Absolutely. That's a really great example, right? So for, resale rights and reproductions, those are other ways in terms of being able to hold on to something. So I have a question from an anonymous attendee. And the question begins, while I understand this is a potentially contentious question, and I don't think it is, I have to ask, and I'm sorry, and the I don't think it is me speaking. I have to ask, do you have advice for young white people entering this discipline of advocacy and study of Black art?
Yeah, I think you should enter it with the same fervor and energy and pursuit of understanding that anybody would enter into that art. I came to art history as an undergraduate at Swarthmore College, studying modern European and modern American art. Modern European and modern American painting and sculpture. That's what it was precisely. And I fell in love with it. At the time, as a junior in college in 1968, I couldn't have named a Black artist, right? So I came to this work loving the art, loving artifacts. And we were required to go to museums. My professor hated slides. He thought slides were a lie. That's what he would say. And he would require us. And so we would go to the Cone Collection in Baltimore, and to the Barnes Foundation, and to the Philadelphia Museum, and to the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, just on and on about that. And that's where we held our classes. And so this love of the art, that's where I got my love of the artifact. And I would say, if it calls to you, you have to speak back to it, right? And if you come to it with integrity, there's room at the table for anybody who has a perspective.
Thank you, President Campbell. And I think you also emphasize when you say, if it calls to you, and you talked about, how you learned to love, art and art history. It was through, this process of object-based learning. Actually, I mean, I can imagine going to the Barnes Foundation, that's your playground. I mean, I had this one opportunity to go to the Barnes before it was closed and then reopened as the new Barnes. And it was around the time, just before the documentary was about to come out. And we did a whole semester-long study about Barnes and his collection and a symposium, and we took students there. But to have that focus of object-based learning, which is really what we preach in curatorial studies and in all of our courses, is something that's so important. It really does get one hooked. So we've got about 4 minutes left, and we have 2 questions. And this one, I think, kind of leads off of what you just said. And this is, what led you to have a career in higher education versus working as a curator?
So I always feel so guilty when I answer these questions about my career, because I always end up saying I stumbled into it, and it was true. I actually, when I left Studio Museum in Harlem, I was totally committed to a career as director and curator. I went to cultural affairs because I thought it was an opportunity to have a platform for my perspective on art and artists that was citywide in the cultural capital of the world.
Mhm.
So I thought that was an important step. I was recruited to go into academia, and I had just had my 3rd son and youngest son. And I remember telling the recruiters, I have no interest in going into higher education whatsoever. Go away. And the woman was so persistent. I said, finally, okay, if you want to come to my house, because I don't have a babysitter, so you can come and interview me if you want, talk to me or whatever. And they convinced me to just come and see this place. And as it turns out, it wasn't higher education that attracted me first. It was a conservatory, because that's what Tisch School in the Arts is. It's a place where artists get trained, right? So I show up there, and it's a building filled with artists. People are dancing and they're making films, and there's theater. And I thought, well, I could be happy here, because that's what I just did at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And so the arts were really the way I entered academia. And then once I got there, I thought, oh, and higher education is interesting too.
Thank you, President Campbell. And so the last question this evening, and I just want to thank you so much again for sharing so generously with us this evening. It comes from Walton Muyumba, and the question is about the film. And so we're going to kind of come back full circle to the film. One of the interesting aspects of Mr. Pollard's documentary is the discussion of collecting and collectors. It seems like a game for wealthy people. But are there ways for people with regular salaries to begin collecting pieces by Black artists?
So I have a little tiny collection. And the way my husband and I put that collection together is that we would go and visit artists who, at the time we visited them, were not known well. And we paid what now looks like a ridiculously low amount of money, because we established a connection with the artwork first, which led us to the artist, which led us to his studio. And that's where we actually first started buying our work, out of artist studios. I'll tell you another story. We had a secretary at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Her name was Carol Martin. She was wonderful. She was there for 30 years. And for every artist in residence, Carol would go to their studio, walk in, and she would purchase a work on paper, a small work on paper. After 30 years, right, of 3 artists in residence a year, she had one of the most spectacular collections of works on paper that you can imagine. So there are ways, is what I'm saying. There are more ways. There are ways where you can learn how to establish these relationships early, look at a lot of work, get to understand vocabularies, mastery of material, listen to artists speak, immerse yourself in the arts, and you'll be able to develop an eye and an ability to begin to choose works by artists who are young and fledgling and beginning, that I promise you will work out over time.
Thank you so much, President Campbell. That was a fantastic way to end this evening in our discussion about Black art in the absence of light. Again, we're just so thankful for your leadership and for your generosity in the work that you do at Spelman College, but also for our program as well. And I just want to say, have a great rest of the semester.
Thank you.
And we, again, also want to congratulate all of our graduating seniors. It's our first class. And we just want to wish everyone a lovely evening.
Yes. Bravo to all of our graduating seniors, and bravo to you, Dr. Finley. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.